Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're diving into something, well, let's face it, tariffs. They might be keeping you up at night, whether you are, running a business or just trying to wrap your head around what's going on with the economy.
It's definitely a hot topic.
It is. And our compass for this deep dive is an article called How Small Businesses Can Prepare for the Impact of Tariffs, published today, March 7th, 2025. So we're going to unpack the strategies that can, hopefully help small businesses not just survive, but maybe even thrive in a world where these border taxes are, well, they're becoming more and more common.
Right, they are.
So imagine instead of a literal toll booth, like on a highway, imagine these tariffs are like speed bumps on that, that global trade highway.
I like that.
They can slow things down, make the trip more expensive, and sometimes even force you to find a whole new route.
That's a great analogy. And, the reasons governments put these speed bumps in place are complex. Sometimes it's about protecting domestic industries from cheaper imports, like giving them a head start in the race. Other times it's a way to, pressure another country into changing its trade practices. And that can lead to those trade wars you mentioned. But the impact on individual businesses, especially smaller ones, can be significant.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that impact. The article uses the term vulnerability, which, maybe that sounds a bit dramatic.
Yeah.
But it makes sense when you think about it. What are some of the red flags that might signal that a small business is particularly vulnerable in this whole world of tariffs?
I would say one of the biggest red flags is if they rely on a single source for a key material or product. Imagine a small furniture maker who gets all of their specialized wood veneers from one country, and then suddenly those imports get hit with a 25% tariff. That's going to really impact their profitability. It could even make it impossible for them to keep operating.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
It's like having all your eggs in one basket and someone just drops the basket.
Yeah.
The article actually suggests mapping out your entire supply chain, not just the immediate suppliers, but digging deeper to understand where their materials come from.
Yeah.
Seems like a smart first step.
Absolutely. And once you've kind of mapped out your vulnerabilities, the next step is to analyze how any potential cost increases would impact your pricing and ultimately your bottom line.
Yeah.
It's not always as simple as just raising prices to cover those added costs, You've got to consider the competitive landscape, customer expectations, and of course your profit margins.
Right. And a lot of people, I think, assume that businesses just calculate profit by selling price minus cost of goods.
Yeah.
But it's a lot more nuanced.
Yeah, it is. Think of it like this. A small business owner needs to consider, not only the direct cost of materials, but also things like rent, utilities, marketing, even the cost of their own time and expertise. All of those factors, they contribute to what we call the break-even point. That's the point at which revenue covers all those expenses. Tariffs can shift that break-even point, making it a lot harder to stay profitable.
So let's dive into some of the strategies, that small businesses can use to navigate all this.
Yeah.
This tricky terrain, the article mentions diversify suppliers and markets. Is that as simple as finding a new supplier in a country that's not affected by tariffs?
Well, it's rarely simple. But diversification is key. It's not just about finding any new supplier. It's about finding, reliable partners who can provide that consistent quality and meet your specific needs. Sometimes this means looking closer to home, which is what we call nearshoring.
Nearshoring.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Can you give us an example of how that might play out in the real world?
Sure. Let's say you're a craft brewery and you rely on imported hops from Europe.
Okay.
With tariffs driving up the cost, you might start looking up hop farms in the U.S. or Canada.
Okay.
Not only could this potentially reduce your tariff exposure, but it might also open up opportunities to collaborate with local farmers and build stronger relationships within, your own community. There are also potential benefits in terms of shipping times and a reduced carbon footprint.
So it's not just about cutting costs. It's about building a more resilient and sustainable supply chain.
Right.
I like that. The article also mentions optimize cost structures.
Mm-hmm.
To some, that might sound like code for slash and burn everything, but it seems like there's a more strategic approach.
Absolutely. It's about finding ways to work smarter, not just harder. Maybe there are opportunities to negotiate better prices with your existing suppliers or streamline your production processes or implement technology that reduces waste or automates certain tasks.
Yeah, okay. So instead of cutting corners, you're cutting out the inefficiencies. Makes sense. Any specific examples of technology that could make a real difference for a small business, facing all these tariff challenges?
Sure. Let's take the example of a small clothing retailer. They might invest in an inventory management system that uses data analytics to, forecast demand and optimize stock levels. And that minimizes the risk of being stuck with excess inventory that's, subject to those fluctuating tariff costs. Or a small manufacturer could explore, using 3D printing to create prototypes or even small batch production runs. And that could potentially reduce their reliance on those imported components.
Those are great examples of how technology can really level the playing field for those small businesses.
Yeah.
But technology isn't cheap.
Right.
And many small businesses are already working on, thin margins, especially with these tariffs adding to the pressure. That brings us to another key strategy that the article really emphasizes, and that is strengthen financial resilience.
Right. That's where having a solid financial cushion comes in. It's not just about, cutting costs. It's about building a reserve that can help you weather the storm if, say, a key supplier raises prices because of tariffs, or if demand for your product softens because of the overall economic climate.
It's interesting because in the past, I think many small business owners focused on minimizing debt as like a sign of financial health. But you're saying access to credit, especially now, can actually be crucial.
Oh, absolutely. Having a line of credit you can, tap into if you need to can be incredibly valuable, especially when you're facing unpredictable cost fluctuations. It's like having an emergency fund for your business, that safety net to help you stay afloat while you adjust your strategies and make those tough decisions.
So we've talked about diversifying suppliers, optimizing costs, and strengthening financial resilience. The article also highlights the importance of leveraging trade policies and advocacy. And honestly, that can sound a bit intimidating for the average small business owner,
It can. It can seem daunting. But staying informed about trade policies and potential changes is so crucial. There might be, tariff exemptions or programs designed to assist businesses that are impacted by specific trade measures. And don't underestimate the power of collective action.
What do you mean by collective action?
Well, things like joining industry associations, participating in lobbying efforts, or even simply connecting with other businesses in your sector. Those things can amplify your voice and potentially influence those policy decisions. There's strength in numbers, when small businesses band together to advocate for their interests, they can have a real impact.
Yeah, I like that. So it's not just about hunkering down and weathering the storm. It's about, engaging with the system and trying to shape a more favorable landscape. And speaking of shaping perceptions, the article also, dedicates a good chunk to enhancing customer communication. Why is this so critical, especially when you're dealing with tariff-related price increases?
Well, transparency is key. When customers understand why prices are going up, they're more likely to be empathetic and supportive.
That makes sense. So instead of just sending out a price increase notification, how can a small business owner effectively communicate these tariff-related challenges to their customers in a way that, builds trust?
Well, imagine you're a small bakery, right? And you've had to increase the price of your croissants because of a tariff on imported butter. Instead of just raising the price tag, you could put up a small sign explaining the situation. It could say something like, we're committed to using the highest quality ingredients, and unfortunately, recent tariffs on imported butter have increased our costs. We've done everything we can to minimize the impact on our pricing, and we appreciate your continued support.
That's a great example. It's honest, it's informative, and it shows the customer that you're not just trying to, pad your profits.
Yeah.
But that you're dealing with these, external forces just like they are.
Right, exactly. And it reinforces the value that you provide as a small business, that personal touch, the commitment to quality, the connection to the community. Those are things customers are often willing to pay a premium for, especially when they understand the context.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've explored the impact of tariffs on small businesses, looked at some key vulnerabilities, and laid out some initial strategies for, mitigating those risks.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about diversifying suppliers, optimizing costs, building financial resilience, getting involved in advocacy efforts, and communicating transparently with your customers. But before we wrap up this segment, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about the potential opportunities that might exist, amidst all these challenges, because after all, constraints can also breed creativity, right?
That's a great point, and it's something we'll explore in more depth in the next part of our deep dive. While tariffs definitely create challenges, they can also force businesses to innovate, adapt, and find new ways to thrive.
Okay, so stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back to explore the silver linings and the hidden opportunities in this ever-evolving world of tariffs.
What's fascinating is that, history is full of examples where what seemed like a roadblock actually forced people to get creative and find new paths to success.
Yeah.
Like, think about the rise of online retailers.
Right.
Back in the early days of the internet, traditional brick and mortar stores, they saw it as a threat, but those who embraced the change, they adapted their business models, connected with customers in new ways, they ended up thriving.
So you're saying that instead of just viewing tariffs as like a purely negative force, small businesses could actually use them as a catalyst for growth and reinvention.
Exactly. It's about shifting from a reactive mindset to a more proactive one, from just trying to minimize losses to, exploring those new opportunities that they maybe hadn't considered before. One area where this is really relevant is the concept of localized production.
Yeah, that's something the article touches on a bit.
Yeah.
This idea that tariffs could actually incentivize businesses to source materials and manufacture goods closer to home. But wouldn't that lead to higher costs?
Yeah.
Especially for businesses that are used to relying on, cheaper imports.
It's true that domestic production can sometimes be more expensive, at least in the short term. But there are other factors to consider, beyond just the sticker price. For example, a small clothing company that, let's say, they shift production from overseas factories to a local network of seamstresses, they might see an increase in labor costs, sure, but they might also see benefits like faster turnaround times, greater control over quality, and the ability to, respond more quickly to changing trends. Plus, there's a growing consumer appetite for locally made products, particularly those with a strong ethical or sustainable story.
So it's almost like a trade-off.
Yeah.
Potentially higher initial costs.
Yeah.
In exchange for, more flexibility, quality control, and a more compelling brand narrative.
Right.
I can see how that might resonate with consumers who are, increasingly aware of the environmental and social impact of their purchases. But even if a business decides to stick with importing, there are still opportunities to get creative, right?
Oh, absolutely. Take, for instance, a small coffee roaster who relies on imported beans.
Okay.
Faced with a tariff on those beans, they might decide to experiment with, blending different origins to create a new flavor profile that really sets them apart. Or they might partner with a local chocolate maker to develop a unique coffee-infused chocolate bar.
Yeah.
Expand their product line, tap into a new market.
I love those examples.
Yeah.
It's about turning that challenge into like a chance to innovate and differentiate yourself.
Right.
It reminds me of that saying, necessity is the mother of invention.
Exactly.
But even the most inventive businesses, still need to have that solid financial foundation to weather these storms.
Exactly. That's why building that financial cushion is so critical. It's not about hoarding cash. It's about having those resources to adapt, experiment, and seize those new opportunities as they come up. The article actually suggests thinking of it as an investment in your business's future.
I like that reframing. It's not just about surviving. It's about positioning yourself to thrive in the long run.
Right.
And recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah.
Every business is different, and the strategies that work for one might not work for another.
Absolutely. It's about finding that right mix of strategies that align with your specific business goals, your values, your risk tolerance.
Speaking of risk tolerance, I wanted to kind of circle back to the topic of trade policies and advocacy. The article suggests staying informed about potential changes and even getting involved in shaping those policies. But realistically, how much influence can a small business actually have on something as huge and complex as international trade agreements?
Well, you'd be surprised. While individual small businesses might not have the same, lobbying power as a big multinational corporation, they can still make their voices heard, especially when they work together. For example, a group of small craft breweries in a particular region could join forces to advocate for policies that, support the domestic hop industry. Or, a network of independent bookstores could lobby for tax incentives that help them compete with those bigger online retailers.
It's about strength in numbers, right?
Right.
Collectively, small businesses they're a huge part of the economy. They employ a lot of people. When they speak together, with the unified voice, policymakers are more likely to listen.
Exactly. And it's not just about, lobbying for specific policies. It's about educating lawmakers and the public about the unique challenges and opportunities that small businesses face in, this globalized economy.
Okay, so we've talked about diversifying suppliers, optimizing costs, building that financial resilience, getting involved in advocacy efforts. But let's not forget about the importance of communicating effectively with customers, especially when it comes to, explaining those tariff-related price increases. We touched on this before, but I think it's worth revisiting.
Oh, absolutely. It's about being transparent, proactive, and empathetic. Don't wait for customers to notice a price increase and then scramble to explain it. Anticipate their questions, address those concerns head on, and frame the situation in a way that reinforces your value proposition.
It's almost like treating your customers as like partners in a way, right?
Yeah.
Sharing the challenges that you're facing and inviting them to be part of the solution.
Exactly. And when you build that kind of trust and transparency, customers are more likely to be loyal and supportive even when things get tough.
So let's say, you're a small business owner and you need to raise prices because of tariffs. How would you approach that conversation with your customers in a way that's honest but also reassuring?
Instead of just sending out like a generic price increase announcement, consider crafting a more personalized message that explains the situation. You could start by, acknowledging the challenges everyone is facing, in this economic climate, including the impact of tariffs on your particular industry. Then you could outline the steps you've taken to mitigate those costs, like exploring alternative suppliers or streamlining your operations. And finally, you could emphasize your commitment to providing, those high quality products or services and thank your customers for their continued support.
Yeah, I like that approach. It's not just about, stating the facts. It's about connecting with your customers on that human level. Showing them that you understand their concerns, that you're all in this together.
Exactly. And it's about framing that price increase as an investment in the long-term sustainability of your business, which ultimately benefits everyone.
Okay, so we've covered a lot in this second part of our deep dive. We've explored the potential opportunities that can come out of these tariff challenges, including the shift towards localized production, that push for innovation, and the chance to build, those stronger relationships with customers. But before we move on to our final segment, I want to ask you a question that's been kind of on my mind throughout this conversation. We talked a lot about adapting to the current tariff landscape. But what if this is just the beginning of a much, much bigger trend? Could we be seeing a fundamental shift, away from globalization and towards a more regionalized economic system?
That's a really thought-provoking question, and it's one that's being debated by, economists and policymakers around the world. There are definitely arguments to be made on both sides.
Let's explore those.
Yeah.
What are some of the potential benefits of a more regionalized economic system?
Well, as we've discussed, one potential benefit is increased resilience. The pandemic really exposed the vulnerabilities of those global supply chains. And a shift towards regional production could really help to mitigate those risks. There could also be environmental benefits, as, shorter transportation distances would mean reduced carbon emissions. And some argue that regionalization could lead to more equitable economic development, as it would create jobs and stimulate growth in those local communities that have been kind of left behind by globalization.
Those are some compelling arguments, but I imagine there are also some potential downsides to consider, right?
Of course. One concern is that, regionalization could actually lead to higher prices for consumers, as, businesses would no longer have access to those cheapest global suppliers. There could also be less variety and choice in the marketplace, as consumers would be kind of limited to the products that are produced within their region. And some economists worry that, a retreat from globalization could actually stifle innovation and limit economic growth as businesses would face less competition.
It seems like a complex issue.
Yeah.
With no, easy answers. How can small businesses, how can they prepare for a future where that balance between globalization and regionalization is constantly shifting?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll delve into in our final segment. Stay tuned as we explore those strategies that can help small businesses navigate, this uncertain terrain and thrive in a world where the rules of the game are constantly evolving.
Feels like we're almost on the verge of this massive reset in how the world does business. We talked about those tariffs being speed bumps, but maybe we're really looking at a whole new highway system being built with more emphasis on like those local roads and those regional routes. How can a small business, how can they even start to prepare for that?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer, as with most things in business, I think, is a blend of strategy, and mindset. We've talked about some of those key strategies already, like diversifying your supply chains, building that financial resilience, and staying informed about those policy shifts. But I think maybe the most crucial element is really cultivating that adaptability.
Adaptability. It sounds a little bit like a buzzword.
Yeah.
But in this context, it takes on like a whole new meaning.
It does.
It's not just about being, flexible. It's about being able to anticipate and respond to change really well, almost like having a sixth sense for what's coming next.
Exactly. And that involves staying curious, constantly learning, and being willing to challenge those, those assumptions that you might have. Imagine a small bookstore, right? That's always relied on foot traffic and local events to drive sales. In a world where consumer habits are shifting online and global events can disrupt, those local economies, that bookstore needs to be able to pivot. Maybe they start offering virtual book clubs or curate those subscription boxes that are tailored to specific interests. Or maybe they partner with local artisans to create a more unique in-store experience that really draws people back in.
So it's about thinking outside the traditional bookstore box, so to speak. And it strikes me that this adaptability mindset, it's not just valuable for navigating the uncertainties of globalization or regionalization. It's really essential for thriving in any business environment.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. That ability to anticipate change, embrace those new technologies, connect with customers in innovative ways. Those are the hallmarks of successful businesses, no matter what the economic landscape looks like.
Okay, so let's kind of zoom out for a minute and think about what this means for our listeners, whether they're, seasoned entrepreneurs or just starting to explore this whole world of business. What's the key takeaway from this deep dive into tariffs and the future of global trade?
If I had to boil it down to one piece of advice, I think it would be this. Don't be afraid to embrace the unknown. We live in a world where change is the only constant. And those who can adapt, innovate, and find those opportunities, amidst all the uncertainty, they're going to be the ones who write that next chapter of the global economy.
Beautifully said. And I think that's a message that really resonates far beyond just the realm of business. It's a call to action for all of us to stay curious, stay engaged, and stay open to those possibilities that are out there. So to wrap things up, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We started by unpacking the impact of tariffs on those small businesses. We looked at those vulnerabilities and explored a bunch of strategies for not just surviving but potentially even thriving in this challenging landscape. We talked about diversifying suppliers, optimizing costs, building financial resilience, advocating for your interests, communicating with those customers effectively. But beyond those practical steps, we've also emphasized the importance of cultivating that adaptability mindset, that willingness to embrace change and find those opportunities, amidst all the uncertainty.
And I think most importantly, we've encouraged our listeners to, view these challenges not as like insurmountable obstacles, but as opportunities for growth, innovation, and even reinvention.
Because at the end of the day, the future of business, like the future of everything really, is shaped by those who dare to imagine what's possible and then take action to make it a reality. That's a wrap on this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of tariffs and the evolving world of trade. Until next time, keep diving deeper.